Hello, everybody.
Hello, Prof. Good evening.
How's everyone? Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. It's all pretty crazy.
Good
Lots of it.
evening.
This is our last week over here, so things are a bit crazy. People are running around. We got a lot of students that are graduating, and so they've got all this last minute stuff to do with their finals. Where am I? Here I am. There we go. So I'm kind of sad. I've been enjoying this course a lot. It's kind of scared me that we're almost over with this one. But it was my first time teaching this Intro to Climate Change course, and I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to go. I hope it hasn't been too cumbersome. But we'll see. Next semester, you should be taking a lot of interesting courses. I'm excited for you for that. You'll be taking my Genetic Engineering 2 course, the Protein Structure course. That will most likely be very difficult, probably one of the hardest courses you've taken. It will require lots of study and lots of time. Yay! But we'll get through it. And I've managed to get through it. Now, that course I've taught several times. I've taught it online, I've taught it in person. And I'm constantly revamping it to try and keep it modern. So we're going to probably have some guest lectures from Tamuka, who's going to show us how to use some up-to-date, cutting-edge AI in doing protein design and all sorts of things like that. So it should be pretty fun. You should learn some skills that you can actually use. Already, what you've learned in Genetic Engineering 1, it's all about skills that you can get employed with right off the bat after you get your degree. And since this course, there's not a lot of hands-on stuff. We're trying to work out, we've got some ideas on how to fund scholarships to bring people over to Claflin to maybe do a few weeks hands-on training. There's also possibility of this boot camp that's in Boston. It's more biotech oriented. That's something that I think it's like an 8-week course that's hands-on and preps you for going into biotechnology industry and such. We're working on that. We'll try and give you those opportunities. Our goal with everybody that's in this program right now is that by the end of the program, we want you to transition into getting paid well for working on climate change. That's our big thing. Whether that's in your current job and just increasing your role there and your pay and your projects, or it's finding a new one. Hopefully in your country or somewhere else, it doesn't matter, just something that you're happy with, and to make sure that you guys are on the front lines dealing with this problem, because I think by now you already know it's a really big problem, and it's serious, and the answers aren't easy. Since we're near the end, we're kind of, we've gone all the way up through chapter 12. I'm not really going to cover chapters 13 and 14. They're good chapters. They're definitely worth reading. You'll probably cover those when you get to the environmental policy and management course later on. You'll come back to this book, so hang on to it. Because it talks specifically about Kyoto Protocol, carbon budgets, exactly where the rest of the world is on some of these decisions to control our emissions, which is where the big stuff happens, right? Mitigating those emissions are a really, really important part. Now, biotechnology is going to play an important role both in adaptation and potentially mitigation, depending on the projects that you're interested in that you choose. If it's a biofuel related project, you're really into bringing down the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and solving the global problem and stopping climate change from happening. If you're going to be engineering plants to withstand droughts or to stop algal blooms or to deal with new emerging diseases that are coming up or pests, invasive species, those are all adaptations. Incredibly important, but they're all adaptations, and we're going to need people to work on them if humans are going to survive, right? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, or at least part of it. Oh, and that's the wrong part. This is the right part. Okay. And let's make this thing a little bigger. Fit it in the screen here. So I'll cover a little bit of stuff from chapter 14, but not a ton. So previously throughout this course, I'm going to try and summarize what we've done in this course so far, as I often do in the beginning of each lecture, right? I go through, we've covered these different points, right? I think we can all agree right now that the Earth is not warring, but warming. And it's mainly due to human activity. I think we've kind of ruled out all the other possibilities. We know that it's human activity, and we know that there's significant warming. As of 2020, in our textbook, the warming was about 1.1 degrees Celsius. And that's really what we've been using are the textbook figures. But I don't know if anybody's been paying attention. This last year, 2023, so far has by far been the warmest year on record. Really, really warm. To the point where the latest data that I could find on it from January to October of 2023, the warming was at plus 1.43 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So the mid 1800s. That's a lot. Okay. That's a scary number because it's jumping a lot more than we expected. Now, remember when you're looking at any particular one number, for one period, that doesn't tell you of a trend. This may be an aberration, right? It's got to fit into a pattern over several years for us to know that that's really the number, right? Because you're always going to get different fluctuations. We do have an El Nino, so it is expected to be a warmer year. So we can't really peg the exact averages until we have kind of a range. But we've discussed this. You know how anomalies are calculated, and that really you have to look over time periods and average them over time periods. But as it stands, 1.43 is not a good number, right? We were hoping to cap, at least based on the Paris Accords, to about 1.5 degrees Celsius, definitely under 2, well below 2. It makes it seem like that's going to be kind of difficult, okay? And beyond all this, we know that the impacts are already being felt, right? We know this. Was there a question in there? Let me make sure everybody's muted. Okay. Sometimes there's a little background noise. But we already know the impacts are being felt. We spent several lectures talking about weather effects and changes in climate and impacts on plants, organisms, pests, the acidification in the oceans, ocean life, food webs, all sorts of things. We've seen that the impacts are already being felt, and we've even quantified them in terms of some economic numbers. Certainly, we could do a whole class just looking at what are the economic impacts of climate change in the last year for climate damage. We know it's a bad thing. And the future only looks kind of worse, right? Um, we know that we've got some choices to make. Um, Otherwise, after 2040, we're going to be seeing some fairly large differences, right? Are we going to stop that global temperature anomaly at 2 degrees, or is it going to continue higher? But in either case, no matter what, we know that we're going to have some more warming and we're going to have those effects, right? Um, so what should we do about this, right? What we do about it is not just a scientific question, okay? It includes moral judgments. You know, you have to balance human welfare versus the welfare of the environment. Um, you know, how important are humans versus other species? You know, the whales, the corals, etc. You also have to balance the welfare of the present versus future generations as well. You know, some people argue that future generations will be more affluent and they will be able to handle it better because they will have more advanced technologies, so we can push it off into the future. And lastly, we've got to think about the welfare of the poor versus the rich, right? Because the damages from climate change are not shared equally. Certainly, the folks that caused it aren't the ones that are suffering the biggest impacts of it. So there's a lot of moral judgments that go around doing it. And even if people agree 100% on the science, they can still disagree on what to do about it, on whether we should take action, what our goals should be, and then specifically what actions we need to take to achieve those goals. So, you know, in your future careers, you're going to run into a lot of folks in it that really significantly differ on their opinions about what should be done or how it should be done. And that isn't just to say that all those people that disagree with you just don't follow the science or are uneducated or stupid or ignorant. A lot of them understand the science, but they have, you know, some other concerns which are very important to them. You know, for some folks, it's about rights and not having the government tell people what they have to do and controlling markets and controlling actions and things, all different sorts of things. So always when dealing with anyone, if they don't agree with you, always treat them with respect and, you know, come at it from a position of respect. Otherwise, you're never going to convince them to do anything. You'll never come to terms. You've got to come in with a certain amount of respect. Always stand your ground, but, you know, don't come at it in a disrespectful way. But regardless of what actions we're going to take at a global level, we know that we have to bring down CO2 emissions and we will have to adapt to the changes that are happening now and the changes that will happen until the 2040s. Adaptation is essential. And so a lot of your future projects as a biotechnologist are going to be about an adaptation, unless you're looking at, you know, trying to pull CO2 from the air. And there's some interesting projects there, but a lot of them, you know, you're seeing in the areas where you live some real drastic problems that are affecting people now and need to be solved. And those are fantastic opportunities to try and use your science to make a difference and make the world better. And we've tried to build this concept into our entire program because we don't want to just teach people about biotechnology and climate change. We want to help form climate activists and climate entrepreneurs, climate inventors, climate people who take action and try and make the world better, because we know that these are really serious problems and that they affect people. And so as part of that, we have this Capstone Project. that's I've mentioned a couple times. It's built into the program. It's something that you're going to complete by your final year. It's a requirement of the degree. And really what the Capstone Project is you'll be writing a scientific proposal. And has anybody here written either a thesis or a proposal before in their education? I see Caldrian, you're raising your hand. Shepard, you're raising your hand. Shepard, Sire, you are too. Shepard, can you tell us a little bit about what was it a thesis, a proposal? What was it about? You're on mute. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, it was a thesis. It was for undergraduate. So I was treating an invasive plant which is called Venena trabeculentus. So I was using glyphosate and the imazapyl chemicals to find which one can control that invasive species.
Okay, great. And a thesis is great experience because, it's just like writing a scientific paper, right? You've got a background and a lit review that you have to go through to really understand and explain the science. Then you're going to have a really detailed materials and methods section that describes exactly how you performed your experiment. You'll have a results section that show the results, and then a section where you make conclusions. And all of that will be backed up by plenty of references that you have at the end. Was that the format, Shepard, of your thesis? Yeah,
Yes, Prof.
scientific.
It was,
Yeah,
yes,
scientific.
scientific. Yeah, yes, Prof.
Okay. Desire, how about yours? I saw you raised your hand. You want to tell us, was it a thesis or a proposal, and what was it on?
It was basically, we were looking at anti-cancer effects of this plant called Ilex crenata. It's a Japanese holy plant. They call it Japanese holy plant. So we read that the plant has anti-proliferative effects or substance that like anti-proliferative substance in it. So we were exploring, looking at with an outlook of maybe the plant could be used in cancer projects. So we were using onions, which is Allium cepa, the scientific name of the exact onion. So we're basically looking at that and seeing how it would affect like cell growth. Then it did manage to inhibit the growth. So we couldn't explore further than that, but we did establish certain concentrations of that Japanese holy plant in relation to inhibition of plant growth. We're looking in particular at the roots of the onion plants.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And again, I think everybody can hear in there, there's specific set of experiments that were done, observations that were carried out, and then a set of results that are kind of presented at the end of some. What was the conclusion that you drew from your research?
So there was an inverse proportion when it comes to the concentration of that plant. So the lesser the concentration, the more the inhibition that we got, which was the total opposite of what we suspected or what we projected. We thought the higher the concentration, the more the inhibition. So it was a total 10 around.
Oh, that's interesting. But it's great that, that's what science is all about. You go into it with an idea, but you listen to the results. You see what they have to say to form your conclusions. Caldrian, you had mentioned you want to talk a little bit about yours?
Yes, sir. So my project, it was a thesis. It was more on testing the flocculent abilities of environmentally friendly biomolecules on their ability to flocculate harmful algal blooms. And what I tested was two strains of algae, Anabina sp and Microcystis aeruginosa. Those two are have been found to be the most dangerous forms of algae to both people and livestock. So I tested those, and it was a 2-year It was 2-year work over the summer, so I tested those. The first year kind of really, it was composed of more bench work, from the standpoint of me just having different concentrations of the 2 strains of algae, different amounts of flocculants, and just dumping it together and see, okay, this flocculant worked at this concentration of algae versus this flocculant at this concentration of algae. And the second part consisted of more of an engineering component where I was able to build a linear step motor and an actual miniature wave tank. I couldn't program the step motor to kind of move at speeds that I wanted to. I did have some assistance there, but in this component, I was really testing the flocculant's ability to keep the algae precipitated, more like a real world application situation. And so the conclusion of it was that a particular flocculant, the flocculant known as the flocculant known as I'm drawing a blank.
That happens. That happens.
I said so like 5. I'm drawing a blank. But this particular flocculant, excuse me, worked best under stagnant waters. But of course, in real world situations, water isn't usually stagnant, or if it is stagnant and free lying, there's always winds that are moving it, even if it is, stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
But the conclusion was that it did work under stagnant waters, but once wind gusts came through and kind of started moving and shuffling the waters, the flocculant viability was fairly low, meaning you can't just dump a bunch of flocculant into maybe a pond with lots of algae and expect it to work. So maybe using this flocculant alongside coagulants is something that I imagine would be better beneficial to the viability of taking algae and precipitating it, and yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Now, as you've all been listening, one of the things you may have noticed, and this is what I really like about this group, you guys are pretty sharp, is whenever you're talking about a research project, there's always a right way to talk about it. And it starts with mentioning what the research question was, what is it you're looking at? And then you talk a little bit about how you go about trying to answer that question. And then you end with, what you were able to find out about the answer to that research question. And always have that same method going through your head. You first state the research question, talk about what the research question specifically was, then talk about how you go about answering that research question. You might describe what kind of experiments you do, what kinds of variables you're changing, what you're measuring, so they have an idea what's going on there. And then finally, talk about your conclusions or what you observed and what you concluded based on that. And whatever situation you're in, when anybody asks about your research, that's the best way to go about doing it. Whether it's a long presentation that's got many slides, or whether it's a short little elevator speech where you got 2 minutes while you're talking to somebody. It always follows that same format. Okay, and you'll see that kind of reflected in when you write theses and scientific papers, because that's the order that things go in. Anybody know the difference between a scientific proposal and a scientific thesis? The difference between a thesis and a proposal? When do you write it? Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, I understand the proposal as you kind of outlining a body of research in hopes of maybe receiving funding for it.
Yes.
For it to be conducted, kind of outlining research.
Yeah, it's kind of your sell on a project you want to do. I write proposals all the time. We call them grants, right? Grant applications. There's a specific format, just like a thesis, and we'll go over that. And they're pretty much designed to, you've got a problem and you have a solution. You want to talk about that solution. or you've got a problem and you want to learn more about it, and so you have a specific set of experiments that you want to run to try and find that out, and then you explain why it's really important to do that. And so hopefully in the course of our program, you know, as you learn biotechnology skills, you may learn some skills where you go, you know, this skill would be really helpful to apply to this particular climate change related problem. Now, you may already have some problems in mind. I know a few of you do, that you're really interested in, you know, gaining expertise to solve those problems. And that's perfectly cool. But you may find some new skills that you want to apply, you know, at a broader scale. The idea of coming out of the program with a proposal is, you know, if you've identified something, if you're working with an employer, this might be something that we develop, you know, in tandem with your employer, or et cetera. So with the scientific proposal, you first, for our capstone project, it's going to be a proposal, and you're going to identify a climate change related problem. And then you're going to propose some solution using biotechnology. Now, it can be a solution towards the problem, or it can be research on, you know, if this method, you know, is helpful. And so it could be, you know, a set of experiments to find out, does this flocculant actually work well and efficiently towards dealing with this algal problem, et cetera? Or does this particular chemical help against a certain pest? You know, can it be utilized on some pilot scale to show proof of concept, et cetera? And in this project, in this proposal, you're going to have to detail what the current state of the problem is, what's caused it. There might be underlying relationships that are really important that you're going at. So if you're talking about, you know, algae and flocculants, you probably have to talk a lot about how algae communicates and how algae interacts with other algae, and you know, how they become suspended and form these emulsions, et cetera, and biofilms. So there's a lot of stuff that you need to describe and cover to give a context to, you know, what your scientific solution or experiment is going to be. And then in the proposal, you'll have to detail the exact procedures that you're going to take to address the problem or run the experiment, to the point where it's reproducible, where they can follow those procedures. And, you know, if you don't do the proposal, somebody else could. So all of this fits nicely into 5 different sections that are going to be part of the scientific proposal. There's going to be the background and literature review. Then you'll have what we call the specific aims. And the specific aims, I'll go into more detail in a moment, but that's kind of like, what are we specifically trying to find out or do? You'll have a section on the experimental design. It'll probably be, in addition to the lit review, will probably be the largest section, because there you'll have all your detailed procedures. You'll have a significance section, which says why it's important, and some references. Okay, but it's this background and lit review that's really, really important to get your project in the door wherever you're proposing it to. And one of the things we're going to try to do when you've got these, as you're working on the proposals, is we're going to even try to identify a government agency or a nonprofit where we could submit the proposal to, right? And so it's going to be really important when they look at your proposals, one, that they think that the problem is important, and that your discussion of the problem in the background and your lit review is comprehensive. They need to know that you know your stuff, that you know what folks are doing out there. So in your background and lit review, besides identifying the problem, you have to really clearly, concisely describe the specific causes and those important relationships. And you have to do it relying entirely on peer-reviewed literature. So on stuff that's been published or data that's been gathered, right? People don't want to read something that they think are just a bunch of opinions, right? Oh, this is my opinion. I think we should try this, etc. If they're going to invest money in it, and all these things cost money, right? Because they cost time, and people need to get paid for their time. Otherwise, they have to go to a different job. So all these things cost money. They want to know that it's relying on factual evidence. And so it's really important that you cover all the literature that's specifically related to that problem and cover it well. Basically, you need to explain everything that the reader needs to know in order to understand your experiment and your experimental design. So in addition to talking about the problem, whether it's an algal problem, invasive species, or what have you, you'll need to tell them enough information so that when they get into your experimental design, say you're doing a particular type of fluorescence spectroscopy, for example, you probably need to explain in your background in your lit review how the measurements are going to be made, or how they're typically made in this field to come to some of these conclusions. So this way, later on, when they're looking at your experimental design and how you're going to, assay or follow the experiment and determine what's going on, that they understand what those measurements are, the context, how they work, and what those numbers mean, for example. In terms of how many papers are you going to need, I would say at least 15 papers you're going to need to have read, and that's probably a pretty low ball estimate. Okay. Which means that if you have an idea for what you want to work on, start collecting those papers now. Okay. And even if you're not 100% like you got an idea, you're thinking about a project, you'll want to start collecting those papers now. If you end up after the next semester, after you've done a couple courses and learned some other stuff and been turned on to some other ideas, you may switch that. You won't be worse off for having read those papers. I can guarantee you that. The best way to get good at reading scientific papers is just to continue to read them. You will get better. That's why, with kids, I got two 11-year-olds. They're going to turn 12 tomorrow. What they do in school is why do we have to read so much? Why do we have to read so many books this week? The more you read, the better you get at it. And it's true when you're an adult. It's just when you were a kid. And scientific papers can be really difficult at first to consume. And you only get better with that through lots and lots and lots of practice. One of the things that helps in reading a scientific paper is if you're actually interested in what the results are, if you're interested in the topic. And so my guess, if you're identifying a project you want to work on, you're going to be somewhat interested in the information related to it. So that'll be a good thing. So you really want to start collecting papers now. Are all of you familiar with how to do lit searching? I want to go over it a little bit, just because it's a really important step in your process. And for all the rest of the courses, you may need to find some papers on topics. And certainly for your project as you're going along, you need to be able to find it. You don't want to just do a Google search. A Google search will get you all sorts of crazy stuff that's on websites, and you never know if it's correct, right? You got to be really careful and judicious about the websites that you get information from. I would never get my information from just a news website, regardless of what the news source is. Unless it's something like, current political stuff, he did this, they did that. If it's a reputable paper, maybe. But for scientific information, you don't know if they understand it. You don't know if they're telling you the truth or if they got some other motivations. You want to go back to that peer-reviewed literature stuff. And this is kind of neat because it brings our class full circle. Remember, we talked about in the first week of this class, the scientific method, when we were talking about the IPCC and why you could trust what the IPCC concludes versus, the NPCC or other groups, right? It's because of the scientific process. And so, here's what I want you to do. And if you're taking notes, take notes. It's pretty easy on this one, or just kind of follow along. If you got a computer, you can do it well. So you just want to bring up Google. That's the first thing you want to do. And then, hold on a second. It's simple enough. So I'm going to bring over Google over here. Let me shrink this window down. No thanks. There we go. Okay, move this out of the way. It's over here. Go away. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is you just type in PubMed. Okay. And the first link that comes up is going to be this PubMed link, National Institutes of Health. And this is a fabulous place to do your searching from, at least for a lot of biotechnology related things. Now, there's other places and other things you can do. And we can explore those further later on. But just to get started for biotech stuff, PubMed is probably a good place to go. And so once you're in PubMed, you've got this little search bar, okay? And that's where you're going to put in your keywords that are related to your issue. Okay, so I'm just going to put in, I'm interested in ocean acidification. Oh, that's spelled wrong. Ocean acidification. And then as soon as you do that, it'll come up with a bunch of different things. Now, if you expand your window enough, over on the left side, they got a couple little graphs they let you know what years. They have a nice little graph so you can kind of see what years stuff was done on this, because some topics, maybe most of the research was done a long time ago. It just depends. But initially, when you do your search, you want to check this free full text. So it will only give you papers that you can just download when you want. And then when you're first doing this on your topic, you want to select this review article. Does anybody know what a review article is? What's a review article?
Yes, Prof. It's a combination of gathering different papers together to come up with your own paper.
Right. It's called a secondary article because they don't do any experiments in a review article. All they do is review a bunch of other people's experiments and tell you what they did. And they'll usually look at the whole field, or, a portion of the field, or a particular question. And those, it really give an overview of the science. Okay. And so let's just take a look at what some of these review articles are. So let's see. Interactive impacts of constant reef stressors, ultraviolet radiation with environmental stressors on coral physiology. This one's on hermit crabs as a model species for responses to pollution. Okay. So you can kind of see from the titles, and you just go through here and you see, well, let's see. I would be interested in this. See, by reading this article, it can give you a big overview of the science and what's known to date, right? So this review article was published in March of 2023. So up to that date and point, they're talking about what's kind of known about climate effects on coral reefs, right? And how it's affecting their evolution. And so that's a good place to get started, because you don't want to propose a project that somebody's already done before, right? Especially if they prove that it doesn't work, right? So you want to make sure that you know what's been done already. And often in these review articles, they'll, point to things that areas where we don't have a lot of knowledge and where we need more research in, or things that we need to try. And so they can be really useful in getting you ideas as well. So here's some stuff on microplastics, climate change on coral physiology. After 3 decades of experimental research, they're evaluating all the current understandings. Here's ocean and human health stuff, nanoplastics, and you can keep going through these. And what you want to do is you go through a few pages of these things and you pick out ones that look interesting and you read like the top 3. Okay. So, I'd say review at least 3 articles to see what's being done and what's known about the issue. And remember, I'm telling you this because I want you to start on this now, right? I want you to start thinking about, what are some of the issues you want to address, and start collecting papers on it, because that'll give you a good idea as to what might work as a proposal in a year. So once you've read your 3 review articles, then in those review articles, they're always citing papers. This experiment was done here, this experiment was done in this other place, and this is what they found. If they're talking about a technique that you might be interested in using in your proposal, or a very similar experiment, or something that's key to your proposal, you want to get that reference. Okay, you want to get that reference and review that article. Okay, and so that's the whole point of review articles, is it gives you lists of references, and you pick out from the review article which references you should read, so you can cite those in your lit search and your lit review when you do your project and when you try and write your proposal. Once you've selected some of those references from the review articles and read them, then your next step would be to redo the search with better terms. Now that you know more, you can hone in with better terms, scientific terms that you're looking for in the articles. And then you can, say you don't want reviews anymore, you want to get actual articles. So you'll redo the search with better review terms, and now you're looking for primary articles. And then after you get a few of those, finally deselect the free text and take a look at all the articles that are out there. Now you're kind of an expert at what you really need to read, because you've read some review articles, you've read a couple articles that were mentioned in there, you've done some searches and found some free articles. But there may be some articles that you really need to read that aren't free. And so all you got to do is email me or any one of your professors, and we'll go ahead and get you the actual the articles that you need for your that you want to read. Now, so send these articles to us once you get them, if they're good articles. If it's something that you're thinking, oh, I want to kind of pursue this, it's really important to let us know. You send them to me, send them to your other professors. So like, if you're in a class with Dr. Chowdhury on when you're in plant biotechnology, if you're really interested in this one particular plant or these particular articles on plant biotechnology, you want to do something similar, he's the perfect person to send those articles to, right? And you'll want to create a literature club, like a journal club, but we'll help you do it and we'll be a part of it. Because it's essential to sit around and talk about these papers, because sometimes it's hard to make sense of the papers without, with just all by yourself. Another thing you can do as well that a lot of people are trying now is to use an artificial intelligence to help you understand a paper. So, like for example, in ChatGPT, now there's an option where you can give it a PDF and it'll read the PDF, and then you can ask it questions about the PDF, things you don't understand. You could, ask it to explain this part more simply to me, or ask the same kinds of questions you'd be interested in asking, but ask the AI, and that may help you a little bit. So that's this is all stuff on doing this background and lit review, okay? The other section you're going to be writing later on when you do this is going to be the specific aims, okay? And the specific aims are the specific things you're trying to determine. If your idea is to propose a solution and determine if it works, that's what you want to say in your specific aim, right? It could be to conduct this pilot experiment. You want to think of what information are you attempting to collect, what relationship are you trying to understand, or what outcome you're looking for, and you state those specifically. And it might be stepwise. They're often stepwise. First, I need to determine this, like, what's the optimal flocculant concentration? And then I need to determine, will the flocculant work in static versus dynamic conditions? That's specific aim 2. Specific aim 3, would be trying to use it in, say, a real life setting, etc. So you can layer them in your specific aims. Specific aims aren't long. Usually got about between 3 and 5 specific aims for a real proposal. For experimental design, that's like your materials and methods. You're going to describe it exactly so they can follow. You're not going to just say, well, we're going to, genetically engineer this thing. You're going to go through the steps. We're going to acquire these cells. We're going to treat them with this chemical to make them porous. We're going to harvest DNA, et cetera, all the specific steps on how to do it. And in the course of, the courses that you're going to be taking here, you should be learning all the steps on how to do those experimental designs, for what you want to do. Anyone following your experimental design should be able to do the experiment exactly the same way as you end up doing it. And they should be able to get the same outcomes. It's all about reproducibility. It's exactly what we talked about, why the scientific method is really important and why peer review is really important. It's what we talked about at the beginning of the course. There's this idea of reproducibility and testability. Okay. And then finally, you'll follow it with significance, which is why it's important to do this research in the first place, exactly what the effect will be on the greater good. Why do we want to know this? It justifies why you'd spend money on this project. And this is really your final selling piece for, why do this in the first place? And then lastly, you'll have the references. And for your references, anything that isn't common knowledge needs a reference or a citation, okay? So as you're collecting papers, keep them in a stack, keep track of them. And when you're reading them, if you see a sentence in there, you're like, oh, that's a really important piece of information that you're going to internalize. But later on, you're probably going to want to write that piece of information down because it's an important relationship or an important fact. Highlight it and keep a little list of, I got this paper with some highlights in here. I'm probably going to use some of those sentences or at least refer to those. And those are your citations. And again, you're going to be having at least 15, but probably really many more. And we'll cover this again in your capstone experience course taken in your final year. It's a 1-credit course. And by then, we will have developed either a partnership with a faculty member, your employer, local government, nonprofit, or someone that might be interested in this project as well. So we could actually try and implement the project, possibly. Because remember, our goal is to get out there and do stuff, accomplish things. Does that sound cool?
So,
Okay.
so the goal would be to find what you'd rather work on. So if you were to conduct research, that's more so of a thesis, where as opposed to the Capstone Project is more of a proposal where you finding what you really want to do, or would the research that you do be not usable in this case?
Okay, so a proposal can be to do research. So when I write a grant, I want to research, how you design proteins to be more thermostable. And I got some experiments I want to do. That's research, and it's going to end, hopefully, my significance at the end is going to be, well, we're going to learn some rules on how to design these enzymes to, create biofuels. And so that's perfectly fine for a proposal, to propose to do research. It could be a proposal, we want to see, can we, there's a plant that we all plant here, in my region. I want to make it more drought resistant. So the proposal is for making this plant more drought resistant. You're going to have all the specific steps. This is exactly how we're going to do it, And one of the advantages might be, well, Monsanto makes it a drought resistant, form of this crop, but it's so expensive that nobody can afford it. So we want to make our own. And so this is how we're going to do it and stuff like that. And that might be something a local government would be really happy in doing, or a nonprofit would be happy in supporting. At the very least, it's going to give you the experience in knowing how to ask for money and how to be an entrepreneur in this thing. Entrepreneur, at least how to propose to do a research project. Now, if in the course of these 2 years, maybe say within year 2, I've talked a lot to Army Corps of Engineers or what have you, and there's already a research project going on that is a part of this, by all means, it can become a thesis. But the bare minimum we're trying to go for is at least a proposal. But I know with the fall armyworm, we could turn that into a research project tomorrow and actually start making, headway on that. And by the end, maybe have collected some data and be ready to publish, and potentially have a solution for farmers. So all those things we're really interested in. But what's essential, what I can't do for you, is pick what you think you might be interested in working on and read the papers for you and find them. So what I need you guys to do is think about something that might be interesting right now and start to collect a couple papers on it and start to read about it. Now, I'm not saying lock yourself in that this has got to be what your capstone project is going to be in 2 years, but I do want you to start getting involved in learning about something and thinking about something. It'll give us something to talk about in a literature club that we'll probably put together next semester. So we can talk about some of the papers that we found, talk about some of these issues. And then if you share those papers with the faculty members teaching our courses, wherever there's overlap between what we're teaching, we're going to try and relate it. Our idea is to relate what we're trying to teach in the course to what it is you're trying to do and learn in your courses, to what you want to do in your project. So I do need you all to come up with some papers. And we'll talk more on Friday about the format of the oral final. That'll be fun. We'll set up some times for us to sit one-on-one and do an oral final. Probably won't be too long of a final. Might be like 25 minutes where I just ask you some questions. Part of that might be asking you to, send me a paper that you found, because I really want to stir the waters and get people motivated to start thinking, how to apply what you're going to be learning to this stuff. Now you've got an idea what global warming is and what its impacts are. We've talked about a whole breadth of different impacts. You've already come into this with a bunch of ideas in terms of passions on, you know, what problems you'd like to address. And that's awesome. That's totally awesome. We're certainly willing to throw more problems at you. But by all means, we can go with what you're interested in. Thanks, everyone. I gotta run to my I gotta give an exam in my general biology course. So that should be fun. But I will see you again on Friday. And then we'll talk about the final. If you go over everything, if you got any questions, next time's a great time for review questions. If you know, you go over how to do, you know, climate modeling or whatever, power relationships, or questions about the carbon cycle, or any of the IPAT relationships, come with questions if you got them.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Have a great evening, day, morning. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.